Director Michael Arden and scenic designer Dane Laffrey have had a long and fruitful collaboration. Their latest is the new musical, Maybe Happy Ending. I spoke with them both at the Belasco Theater. So you're longtime collaborators, not sick of each other yet.
No, not today.
Tell me, I was thinking about how many things you two have done together, but on Broadway, is this your most ambitious project?
I mean, they're all ambitious on some level or another, but I think from a purely kind of like technical complexity perspective, sure.
And, you know, the fact that this is a completely original new musical like that in and of itself is, you know, probably as difficult as splitting an atom. So that mixed with what we're actually doing on stage, I think probably I would say this is hard work.
And it is so unusual to have a musical that's not based on a movie, that's not based on a novel, that's just pure imagination.
Yeah, it's not songs people know, it's not story, it's not based on real events. It's truly from the imagination of Hugh Park and Will Aronson. And so we're getting to create a world completely from scratch, from the sonic landscape, the visual landscape, the rules of the world, and we're also in this kind of future that we are making up. So it's a real exercise and opportunity for our imaginations just to run free as a group.
So tell me about this world. How do you describe Maybe Happy Ending?
I mean, Maybe Happy Ending, from the perspective of the world, Maybe Happy Ending exists in a, I think, increasingly imaginable near future where AI elements have taken on human form to the point where they're ostensibly indistinguishable from human beings. And that's kind of like the launch pad of the world and the two primary protagonists that we meet.
Yeah, I think it wants to feel like, you know, the what we can imagine in a somewhat idyllic, somewhat dystopian future mixed with like a classic musical sensibility, classic design world. So, you know, despite there being a lot of digital elements, we wanted it to feel really tactile, that the textures were really apparent, and that, you know, there were things very recognizable. Some, you know, we're still having TV remotes somehow in the future, and you know, and Oliver's obsession with, you know, things from the past and LPs and records and things like that. So it's finding sort of classic texture with futurism, you know, mixed with musical comedy.
Obviously there's human metaphor here, and these are helper bots who have a shelf life, as do we. So that is very moving as a human audience member, right?
Yeah.
Claire says everything must end eventually, and I think that's so true. Everything does, you know, it just, we all have to kind of accept that, and yet we're trying to answer the question, which is the first line of the show, which is why love? When you know something must end, why love? What is that human thing that keeps us loving and keeps us getting back up after we fall down in relationships and in life? What is that enigmatic purpose?
From a design standpoint, I can imagine an alternate universe where you could do this piece with a couch and a plant and your imagination. But this is an incredibly intense set design. So tell me about some of the conversations you had about coming up with this. It's a big swing. Mm-hmm. So coming up with the concept and talking to your team.
Yeah, but I think the first thing you said is really important, which is that all really great pieces of theatrical writing can withstand that kind of treatment. So there's no part of what we were doing that was like trying to create smoke and mirrors or compensate for something that the story or the music or the characters aren't doing. Like, that's not the intention. I think the origin point for the general approach was one in which, you know, we wanted to explore how much agency these created beings had in their own environment. Because a lot of what challenges them is that they are supposed to be stuck in this kind of stasis of retirement, just sort of, you know, basically waiting to, you know, power down. And that they then make a choice to go out into the world and go on an adventure without a great deal of control of their circumstances, right? So we've sort of concocted a machine that, you know, propels them and it holds them, and then it gives them something to be released from, and it sort of carries them through and ultimately carries them back.
You are responsible for the many video elements of this show, but they're so subtle.
Yeah, it's one of those shows. I think we've got 605 video tiles embedded across the set. Proscenium, portal, we've even got video ceiling, and we use them in a really delicate way. And it's really nice that you say that, because it's something that as a designer I was really passionate about, because I think we could very quickly have just become, video's always on, here we are, we're doing this. The story is so subtle and delicate and just pulls at your heartstrings. And I think the video does that as well, of we're on a road trip, but then suddenly that just disappears and you're back in this beautiful black box cubic world, and then suddenly we're in this massive Jeju scene and the flashbacks. It's a really it's been a fantastic one to design and play with that of oh, we can do a little bit here, but or maybe we won't do anything here. I think that's been really fun to explore.
Tell me some of the joys and challenges of working with this team. And obviously, Michael and Dane have known each other and worked together for a very long time, and you're coming in fresh.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a real privilege, really, to step into their kind of duo and how they've kind of created this piece that's it's fresh and it's new, and it's really exciting and rare to do something that's brand new and be with people that are so collaborative. But I mean, Michael steers the ship in such a fantastic, glorious way that it makes my job a lot easier. He's got such a clear vision for what it is, and it's the exact right vision for this piece, which makes creating these magical worlds, I like to say easy, but it's not, but more simple.
What have you learned from working on this piece?
Do you know what? It's really fascinating, because there's this expectation, I think, of Broadway shows, especially come from London. Everyone's Broadway, the kick lines, the flashy lights and stuff. There's something that's just so honest and true about, you can have this gorgeous theatre, which is just incredible to be in, and have a show with 4 people in it and just be absolutely captivated by something that is so utterly simple and this crazy tech world that's going on around them. It's just been a fascinating experience to kind of step into it in that way and be hey, we can strip something right back and make it's theatre, it's art, it's storytelling at its finest.
Even though it's complex and I think everyone's talking about the spectacle of it, what we've tried to do is create something, though it transports us to many places, it always gives the audience an active role in that. We use black a lot in this,
yeah,
and neon, and we create spaces to kind of guide the eye and show how these characters are boxed in or contained. However, there's so much more we're hoping to evoke than show here.
I heard that you sourced items from Korea down to light switches, and that you really paid attention to some of the intricate details that maybe the audience doesn't even see but feels, and certainly the actors are aware of.
We spent a lot of time in the show in Oliver and Claire's kind of respective apartments, which are sort of kind of mirror images of each other, and based very much on this one particular building that's actually in Japan and not Korea, or was, and it was an architectural experiment from the 70s, this kind of futurist utopian idea about a modular home that could, exist in a tower in Tokyo, and then if you moved, you could take your home with you, and there'd be another tower it could get plugged into somewhere else.
Sort of like a big Jenga set, actually, is what the building was.
It's a wonderful kind of academic architectural idea that ultimately was a failed idea because they only ever built one building. So these pods, which were built to move around, just kind of stayed there and slowly decayed. And we happened to be fortunate enough to see it in person right before it was disassembled. And it was kind of magnificently broken down with extension cords coming out of the thing and tarps and leaks and things. And you sort of felt oh, well, we're kind of witnessing something that feels has a strong corollary to this story about these kind of pieces of cutting edge technology, this bold new idea about how technology can work, and as it, ultimately, breaks down. I'm very fond of the way that we have carved those out and detailed those and like found a way to, to contrast between, Oliver, who, the opening number is The World Within My Room, who's kind of like, he's maybe a bit of an agoraphobe, but certainly is like obsessed with his surroundings. He feels like a Cancer to me, which I am. He's the shell, and Claire's who's a little bit more like resigned and uninterested in just, just trying to get her charger working, but hasn't like, hasn't decorated.
One detail I love is just all of the records in the show are incredibly detailed, all the albums of Gil Brantley, and they're populated on the set, and we've made all these specific album covers with Des Duran on them, correlating to what the song is, and so every time we see Gil Brantley on stage, it's sort of an album that has come to life. So if you really clock, you'll see on a wall here or in a stack of records here that album cover, and he appears in this costume later, and so that's a fun little tidbit to keep an eye on. And also, Waboon is really the star of the show, who is Oliver's houseplant and best friend.
Yeah. And
Waboon goes through several phases if you really keep your eye on him. The opening and ending image of the piece is Waboon, because for me, this is a play, although it's about robots in the future, it is about life.